Hello and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we discuss cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we'll be talking about a collaborative effort by several different hacker groups to extort multiple organizations through a series of Salesforce breaches that have occurred. Three groups that have teamed up are Scattered Spider, Lapsus, and the Shiny Hunters. In this initiative, they have opted to call themselves the Scattered Lapsus Hunters. Really creative. Together, they launched a data leak site specifically for all of these Salesforce breaches. And so far, 39 different companies are facing the threat of their data being leaked on the site. Each company contains a small dataset as proof that this is indeed real data. You're probably also going to be quite familiar with a lot of the names, as most of these are pretty big players in their industries. FedEx, Hulu, Google, Cisco, Toyota, HBO Max, Chanel, and IKEA are all listed as potentially having their data leaked later this month. The Shiny Lapsus Hunters have set a deadline of October 10th for any of these 39 companies to begin negotiations before all that data is leaked for good. But it doesn't end there, as the mega group has also demanded a ransom from Salesforce themselves to prevent data from even more impacted customers from being leaked as well. In a really interesting move, they've also offered to help law firms, so that they can pursue civil suits against Salesforce following all of these data breaches, as well as failure to protect customer data under GDPR, the General Data Protections Regulations under the European Union. If you're not familiar with what Salesforce is, it's a customer relations management software. They provide services for sales, customer service, and some marketing and analytics tools. The Scattered Lapsus Hunters have been targeting Salesforce customers with a voice phishing attack. Basically, they call customers pretending to be from Salesforce to try to get credentials from them, or even convince them to link their Salesforce instances to a malicious authorization app, which is how they managed to compromise data from all these major organizations. Of course, now that they could access those instances, they were able to steal the data that exists on there and extort it for ransom. Even though this is a ransomware group, there's no actual ransomware involved. No encrypting of any of this data, just stealing it and threatening to leak it, which is still pretty effective but requires considerably less effort than having to encrypt entire systems. But what kind of data are we talking here? It would all be customer-related data, likely personal information like names, emails, phone numbers, and potentially address or even payment information. Though hopefully only partial payment information. Though I couldn't find a ton of specifics on what's actually being ransomed up. Salesforce, in the wake of all of this going on, also made a comment, saying they specifically have not been compromised directly. And this is true. Hackers targeted individual Salesforce instances rather than Salesforce as a whole to collect all of this data. Salesforce, because of that, ultimately isn't responsible for the companies being vished by hacker groups. But despite this, even though technically they didn't do anything wrong, they've still taken damage to their reputation because seeing your company name and the word hack together in headlines is never a good thing, even if it wasn't actually you, the company, who was hacked. People are still going to make that association, even if it's not necessarily a fair one to make. There isn't a ton Salesforce could have really done about this. It's kind of like blaming Google for someone phishing you out of your Gmail password. Though they could perhaps release a statement saying that these voice phishing instances are very common, and that Salesforce will only contact you through XYZ means, whatever that typically is, and maybe they'll never ask you to link this third-party app. Something that kind of informs their customers that this is happening and not to fall for it. But even then, not everyone heeds those kind of warnings. That's why phishing still happens after all. We learn about it every year, and yet it still keeps happening. It's one of the biggest causes of compromise out of, well, anything, basically. Salesforce isn't the only one that's been talking quite a bit, though. The Scattered Lapsus Hunters have claimed so far that almost none of the 39 companies have reached out for ransom negotiations. So we'll have to wait until the deadline to see what actually happens with all of this. I suspect many will probably reach out based on the samples, or maybe they'll even determine that the data is fake and opt to say nothing. Faking data isn't exactly completely uncommon for these types of situations. Though even if fake, like I was saying earlier, a breach in this data could still result in reputational damages. Because again, seeing your company's name and data breach in headlines together are not usually a good thing. Salesforce is still in a bit of an odd situation, though, facing over 1 billion records from their customers being potentially leaked to the internet, and facing extortion for that despite never being directly compromised in the first place. This is a really interesting method of requesting a ransom from an organization. Not even targeting them directly, but threatening them with something like a reputational damage due to this data being leaked on the open internet. Thank you to Bleeping Computer, Dark Reading, TechCrunch, Reuters, and the Register for information on this, not even a single data breach, multiple data breaches, and ransom attempts. Something like this is really interesting, and I will definitely be watching to see how this plays out on October 10th. Maybe we're seeing a ton of data breaches of these huge corporations, or maybe it's just kind of nothing. Who knows? If it ends up being pretty big, it might even be next week's topic. We'll see. But until then, stay secure.